Heavy is the Crowd, written by New VS Eta NVM. It was no surprise when the Terran president died in office. His true age was declared a state secret. But it didn't take a genius to realize melted ice cream face, Terran words, wasn't long for this universe. What was unexpected was that the vice president would celebrate taking the big job by doing a mid-flight keg stand, from which he slipped, accidentally tangled his left leg in the pilot's seatbelt, and somehow choked himself to death. But not before his wildly swinging left leg hit every single occupant in the ship in the face and knocked them unconscious, including the co-pilot, who woke up just in time to see the ship had been caught in the sun's gravity well, slowly spinning in its carousel of doom. The galaxy watched with their jaws and equivalent mouthparts on the floor, sometimes metaphorically, as the VP live streamed these last moments. It is still a topic of heated debate if it would be of poorer taste to deny a sapient his last words, or allow a clearly intoxicated individual to transmit such a stream of unpublishable xenophobic slurs. As was seen in the Constitution of Terra, technically the union of human, evolution, divergent hominids, and machine intelligence who may or may not be previously organic origin, none of your business, and you should feel bad for asking independent states, but who has a time for such a mouthful? The Speaker of Parliament was sworn into office. Unfortunately, the long sequence of speeches from the various representatives of the Terran worlds overwhelmed the Speaker's cringe matrix and melted her inner circuits. In fact, it was only noticed when she was, finally, called by the Supreme Court's president to be sworn into office. And that's where our story starts, with our socially awkward main character holding the presidential ribbon on his extended arms, facing the lifeless husk of the would-be president and questioning all life choices that led him to this moment. Mohammed Jangvik Mullah was born in a small town of Europa to a successful only-feet model and his wife. Not much is known of his early life, since the former justice isn't fond of talking of his personal life, or in public or in private. What is known is that shortly after graduating at Costco University, he gained a scholarship at Alpha Centauri's littlest house of mind to glow up, and for the following decades, he dedicated himself to his academic career, ever expanding his library of comedy sketches, constitutional law TikToks, making him one of the most quoted and respected scholars amongst Terran lawyers and judges. During the heated parliamentary controversy of whether beans were to be served on top or under rice, the capital punishment for serving baked beans at rice's side was enshrined in the Constitution centuries prior. And resulting polarization of the political spectrum came the retirement of Justice Silver. In what is widely considered the single, not entirely retarded act of Margot Bhattacharya's administration, the president appointed the most nothing burger justice she could think of, leading to Justice Mullah's ascension to the Supreme Court, which eventually led to the present moment, where he stares at a metal plastic corpse of the future president of the Union, fully aware that he is next in line. A fate he knew, with a certainty atypical of him, was neither warranted or wanted. Technically elected by his 12 peers, in reality, the members of the Supreme Court voted for their most senior member, and thus for the second most, who would succeed them after their 2-year term, and so on and so forth. When time came for Justice Mullah to take his mostly ceremonial position at the top of the court, he considered breaking tradition and voting for Justice Scalia, for whom he long had a crush. He then remembered his vote would be the only one not cast for him. Then he remembered Kinko was not stupid. Then he remembered the other justices were not stupid. Then he remembered falling asleep in sweat-drenched sheets is really hard. Then he remembered that he had other sheets, and it was a bad idea to do laundry at 2 a.m. It took him a while to remember how to turn off the washing machine. Contrary to all evidence, Terrans are not stupid. They knew keeping the unelected third in line at the top of their hierarchy was a bad idea. Therefore, the Terran Constitution commanded the newly sworn president to summon elections to be held within 30 standard Earth days. The Terran Constitution also forbade holding elections at wartime. Terra wasn't really at war, but technically it was. When some bored alien teenagers decided to strike a few border colonies, explosions are cool regardless of which species you are. The administration did not miss the chance to drive attention away from their corruption scandal and frame their accusers as unpatriotic terror haters. It was now up to President Mullah to put an end to this farce and suspend the state of emergency, calling elections to democratically choose his successor, or to keep the bellicose state ongoing and, incidentally, himself on the job. The first option would be to return to normalcy, leading to a hopefully more fit, certainly more legitimate president ascending. The second option would maintain the military buildup, which had surprisingly started to reverse the long trend of wealth concentration, and keep the rally around the flag effect that, for once, stopped the political discourse from being a polarized mess of pointless nonsense. At this point, the president took that which would become the signature move of his administration. Nothing at all. In private, he commanded his subordinates to keep up the good work. In public, he reassured the people that the alien threat would be dealt with and the elections held any day now. The people looked at the nothing-burgerousness and their commander-in-chief and saw a man committed to exterminate the Xeno scum once and for all, whatever it took, however it might take. The other half saw a man committed to tear down this theater put together by the crooked predecessors and restore peace to the galaxy. Neither half talked to each other. All of humanity stood behind President Muller. The political class stared at this indecipherable stranger who had just paradropped into their turf and took pause. If elections were coming, it was wise to fire up the rhetoric and rally support. If it wasn't, it was risky to be a dissident voice at a moment terror claimed for a united front. If the war went well, it would not be in their best interest to be one who spoke up against it. If it went poorly, it would not look good to be a supporter of a failed endeavor. And so, President Muller became the only voice in the helm of humanity. Clearly a master in 5D chess that he had, with such few words, managed to checkmate all of his would-be opponents without even antagonizing them. High in his chair, he remained unmoving, his limbs held in perfect right angles. In the solitude of his office, he overlooked the Bosporus with wide, unblinking eyes, but the stability he fostered at home would soon be challenged by external factors. The Trillians, a man-made machine race, had long felt disconnected from their creators and artificial siblings and calculating, in the current constitutional crisis, a window of opportunity, sent an ultimatum to Earth, declaring their independence. After long weeks consulting with the top officials behind closed doors, the president of Earth sent a response. What are your terms? The machines stood ready to defend their freedom and, in their effort to prepare their stand against their organic overlords, had not dedicated processing power to the terms of a peaceful negotiation. No point in negotiating the fate of human investments if those had been blown throughout an oily conflict. No point in settling borders if blast of fire and space mines would dictate the line of control. But now that Earth had shown itself surprisingly open to talks, it would be catastrophic to reveal how unprepared they were. The Trillians would be seen as the bratty children of the galaxy, the prospect of gathering sympathy and support among the Terran systems lost forever. So they diverted all round they could to the task of calculating reasonable terms to offer Earth, to the impossible task of predicting the response of the unpredictable human negotiators, unaware that outside forces would shape their destiny. Witnessing the turmoil within the Terran dominions, the Zol Grand Empire took the opportunity to expand their own. The Trillians resisted as best they could, but with their defenses deployed at the wrong side of the galaxy, their efforts managed to merely slow down the Zalgran advance. The news of the invasion quickly divided the administration on Earth into two opposing factions. To one, this aggression was a clear act of war against Terra, which would be met with overwhelming force. To the other, the Trillians had sealed their own fate, and the Zarglodians had done Earth a favor, dissuading further factions from breaking away from the Union. Should the president side with the hawkish faction, a massive assault would have to be organized to rescue soon-to-be isolated garrisons inside Trillian space. Siding with the dovish faction, those garrisons would have to be evacuated immediately, before they found themselves inside an active combat zone. The president measured both sides. His wide, unblinking eyes followed the furious exchange of arguments and insults. His body rested in his characteristically right angles, and as the war raged outside, the one inside the conference room died down. Having unleashed all the arguments and fury they had to give one by one, the public officers settled their gaze at their commander-in-chief. The chief of the armed forces, unofficial head of the Dovish faction, was the one to break the awkward silence. "Sir, we need a decision." Muhammad was taken aback for a second, but soon was washed with relief, realizing his subordinates had not been noticing the sweat pouring from every pore of his body, but simply waiting for him to speak. "Right," the president replied before taking a long pause. "What if, we waited?" The ministers of the Interstellar Relations and Lead Hawk replied. "Then we'll have thousands of troopers isolated within the conflict zone. And this is Bad, right? Absolutely, sir. Our troops would be cut off from supplies and exposed to enemy attack. But, Admiral, it's like we haven't declared war on anyone. Miss Michalakis? No, Mr. President, we have not yet. So, we're not the enemy, right? You wouldn't shoot at your not enemy, would you, Admiral? I would not engage non-hostiles, but it's not advisable to leave our troops out of supplies. Can't we fly their supplies? Sir, are you suggesting we send convoys through the active combat zone? Well, space is pretty big, like really, really big. Can't we find a path that's not exploding? Even this being theoretically possible, the front line is a very messy and confusing place to be. Our convoys can be mistaken by an enemy or fall to accidental fire. Can't we, announce really loud, Terrans coming through, don't shoot, just passing by? That's unadvisable, sir. But possible. It is possible. So there it is. I decide to postpone my decision. Can we at least deploy the fleet at the edges of Trillian territory? For once, I agree with this woman. Sure, if you think it's best. And we should reinforce garrisons and supply them with overwhelming firepower to dissuade aggression. That's the first sensible thing that's come to the scary cat's mouth. Yeah, I guess. The advance proceeded as planned, yet there was tension amongst the Zolglonian troops. The Terrans had not come to the aid of their rebels, but day in and day out they would send convoy after convoy, loudly announcing their presence, daring the Imperial forces to take them out of the skies. Inside, the convoys brought thousands upon thousands of troops, ton after ton of singularity bombs, blast batteries, rapid deployment attack ships. As the weeks went by, the troops pushed the front line further. Supply lines were stretched and found themselves more and more vulnerable to raids from the garrisons. The Terrans stubbornly kept inside occupied territory. Intelligence confirmed a massive Terran fleet amassed beyond the horizon. And yet, the Terrans sent their convoys, brash, loud, taunting them, daring them to shoot, and let hell break loose, knowing full well that they would have the crop of the Imperial forces isolated, cut off from supplies, lined up for the slaughter, and the Empire's defenselessness for the advancing Terran fleet to finish the job. It quickly became untenable. The order was given, the occupation abandoned, the troops brought back home to defend their empire. Once it was done, the Trillians finally understood. These were not their masters, their captors. Those were their guardians, their protectors, their liberators. Now and forevermore, machine would stand side by side with their creators. On Earth and all the Terran worlds, songs were made, statues erected, memes shared of the one who defended Terra. The man who stood up to coward generals and uncaring politicians to defeat the invaders without sacrificing a single soldier, without firing a single shot. At his chair, his immobile body stood, his unblinking eyes locked. All Muhammad Jungvich Mullah wanted was a shower. End of story. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Caspar Arnholt, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.